Hello, second grade. My name is Jennifer Albarran. Today's theme is friendship, and friendship is a very important part of life. There are many ways and places to make friends. You can make friends in your classrooms, on a sports team, in your neighborhood. And it's important to know that in order to have good friends, you need to practice yourself how to be a good friend. So, the book that we have for you today, second graders, is Frog and Toad Are Friends. And it was written by Arnold Lobel. And everybody is going to receive a copy of this book to take home and keep and share with family and friends. But we will get started. After we read the book, we'll go through some discussion questions, and then you will be doing an activity as a classroom with your teacher. Awesome. So there are about 5 little stories in this book, and we will get started with the first 3, and then the other 2 will be up to the class to finish. So spring is our first story. Frog ran up the path to Toad's house. He knocked on the front door. There was no answer. "Toad, Toad!" shouted Frog. "Wake up! It is spring!" "Blah," said a voice from inside the house. "Toad, Toad!" cried Frog. "The sun is shining. The snow is melting. Wake up!" "I am not here," said the voice. Frog walked into the house. It was dark. All the shutters were closed. "Toad, where are you?" called Frog. "Go away," said the voice from a corner of the room. Toad was lying in bed. He had pulled all the covers over his head. Frog pushed Toad out of bed and pushed him out of the house onto the front porch. Toad blinked in the bright sun. "Help!" said Toad. "I can't see anything." And feel free to follow along with me as we go through the book. Page 8. "Don't be silly," said Frog. "What you see is the clear, warm light of April, and it means that we can begin a whole new year together." Toad, "Think of it," said Frog. "We will skip through the meadows and run through the woods and swim in the river. In the evenings, we will sit right here on this front porch and count the stars." "You can count them, Frog," said Toad. "I will be too tired. I am going back to bed." Toad went back into the house. He got into the bed and pulled the covers over his head again. "But Toad," cried Frog, "you will miss all the fun." "Listen, Frog," said Toad. "How long have I been asleep?" "You've been asleep since November," said Frog. "Well then," said Toad, "a little more sleep will not hurt me. Come back again and wake me up at about 1/2 May. Good night, Frog." "But Toad," said Frog, "I will be lonely until then." Toad did not answer. He had fallen asleep. Frog looked at Toad's calendar. The November page was still on top. Frog tore off the November page. He tore off the December page and the January page, the February page, and the March page. He came to the April page. Frog tore off the April page too. Then Frog ran back to Toad's bed. "Toad, Toad, wake up! It is May now." "What?" said Toad. "Can it be May so soon?" "Yes," said Frog. "Look at your calendar." Toad looked at the calendar. The May page was on top. "Why, it is May," said Toad as he climbed out of bed. Then he and Frog ran outside to see how the world was looking in the spring. Awesome. So now this is our second story called The Story, and it's on page 16. One day in summer, Frog was not feeling well. Toad said, "Frog, you are looking quite green." "But I always look green," said Frog. "I am a frog." Today you look very green, even for a frog," said Toad. "Get into my bed and rest." Toad made Frog a cup of hot tea. Frog drank the tea and then he said, "Tell me a story while I am resting." "All right," said Toad. "Let me think of a story to tell you." Toad thought and thought, but he could not think of a story to tell Frog. "I will go out on the front porch and walk up and down," said Toad. "Perhaps that will help me to think of a story." Toad walked up and down on the porch for a long time, but he could not think of a story to tell Frog. Then Toad went into the house and stood on his head. "Why are you standing on your head?" asked Frog. "I hope that if I stand on my head, it will help me to think of a story," said Toad. Toad stood on his head for a long time, but he could not think of a story to tell Frog. Then Toad poured a glass of water over his head. "Why are you pouring water over your head?" asked Frog. "I hope that if I pour water over my head, it will help me to think of a story," said Toad. Toad poured many glasses of water over his head, but he could not think of a story to tell Frog. Then Toad began to bang his head against the wall. "Why are you banging your head against the wall?" asked Frog. "I hope that if I bang my head against the wall hard enough, it will help me to think of a story," said Toad. "I'm feeling much better now, Toad," said Frog. "I don't think I need a story anymore." "Then you get out of bed and let me get into it," said Toad, "because now I feel terrible," Frog said. "Would you like me to tell you a story, Toad?" "Yes," said Toad, "if you know one." "Once upon a time," said Frog, "there were two good friends, a frog and a toad. The frog was not feeling well. He asked his friend the toad to tell him a story. The toad could not think of a story. He walked up and down on the porch, but he could not think of a story. He stood on his head, but he could not think of a story. He poured water over his head, but he could not think of a story. He banged his head against the wall, but he still could not think of a story. Then Toad did not feel so well, and the frog was feeling better. So the toad went to bed, and the frog got up and told him a story." The end. "How was that, Toad?" said Frog, but Toad did not answer. He had fallen asleep. All right. A lost button, page 28. Toad and Frog went for a long walk. They walked across a large meadow. They walked in the woods. They walked along the river. At last, they went back home to Toad's house. "Oh, Dart," said Toad. "Not only do my feet hurt, but I have lost one of my buttons on my jacket." Oh no, Toad lost a button. "Don't worry," said Frog. "We will go back to all the places where we walked. We will soon find your button." They walked back to the large meadow. They began to look for the button in the tall grass. "Here is your button," cried Frog. "That is not my button," said Toad. "That button is black. My button was white." Toad put the black button in his pocket. A sparrow flew down. "Excuse me," said the sparrow. "Did you lose a button? I found one." "That is not my button," said Toad. "That button has 2 holes. My button has 4 holes." Toad put the button with 2 holes in his pocket. They went back to the woods and looked on the dark path. "Here is your button," said Frog. "That is not my button," cried Toad. "That button is small. My button was big." Toad put the small button in his pocket. Oh no, Toad is upset now. A raccoon came out from behind a tree. I heard that you were looking for a button, he said. Here is one that I just found. That is not my button, wailed Toad. That button is square. My button was round. Toad put the square button in his pocket. Frog and Toad went back to the river. They looked for the button in the mud. Here's your button, said Frog. That is not my button, shouted Toad. That button is thin. My button was thick. Toad put the thin button in his pocket. He was very angry. He jumped up and down and screamed, "The whole world is covered with buttons, and not one of them is mine." Toad ran home and slammed the door. There on the floor he saw his white, four-holed, big, round, thick button. "Oh," said Toad, "it was here all the time. What a lot of trouble I have made for Frog." Frog was only trying to help. Toad took all the buttons out of his pocket. He took his sewing box down from the shelf. Toad sewed the buttons all over his jacket. The next day, Toad gave his jacket to Frog. Frog thought that it was beautiful. He put it on and jumped for joy. None of the buttons fell off. Toad had sewed them on very well. Awesome. You could choose to read the following stories. There are about 2 left, and the next one is A Swim. But we will go right into the discussion questions. Teachers, if you would like to pause the video now to finish the book, you can definitely do so. Or you could also pause the video to take a moment to discuss some of these questions. So the question that I have for you all is, what are some qualities that you look for when making friends? I know that whenever I am making new friends, I really value a person that knows how to be kind to others. For example, in one of the stories, when Frog was sick, Toad tried to do everything and anything to help his friend who was not feeling well. And I think that's really kind of him to do so. Also, I look for a friend that is very supportive and encouraging, that motivates me. And so in the first story, I believe it was Frog that was trying to motivate Toad to get out of bed and enjoy the spring time. And that's another thing that goes along with a quality within a friend that I look for. So give your examples to your class, share, and then the activity that I have for you all is called Friendship Bingo. And so you as a classroom or the teacher will go through the sheet, the handouts that were provided to your teacher, and students, you'll follow along. If the statement applies to you, then you will cross out the statement. First student to get a line wins. So it's going to be similar to bingo, just with characteristics that match you. And you got to be honest with this so that the game works accordingly. So like I mentioned, first student to get a line wins. For a challenge, see if you can make an X in your sheet. So that is going to be the activity for today. We hope that you loved your book. Don't forget to take it home. It is yours to keep. And I will see you on the next one. Bye-bye.